we are going to discuss the next question in GS paper 1 that has been asked in 2022 UPSC, and the question is displaying on the screen. The question is, why did the armies of British East India Company, that is mostly comprising of Indian soldiers, win consistently against the more numerous and better equipped armies of Indian rulers? Okay, give reasons. This is the question that has been asked in GS paper 1 in 2022, and this is a 10 marker question. You have to answer this question in 150 words. So what I am going to do is we are going to discuss about what the stuff you have to write in this question, okay, while writing the answer of this question, and I will also discuss with you various other dimensions that you will prepare while writing or preparing for the answer of this question. Okay, so whenever any question is asked in UPSC and while you are just practicing the answer writing for that specific question, what should be the method is that you should try to prepare the entire theme. For example, when you are looking at this question, what is the main theme of this question? First, try to identify the main theme of the question. Then comes anything else. So whenever we are writing the answer of any question, we will first try to identify the main theme of the question. And the main theme of question here is related to the role of Indian soldiers that has been played in India during the colonial phase. How Indian soldiers played important role in the establishment and expansion of British Empire. And the same Indian soldiers who were also a part of armies of native rulers or the local rulers. Okay, so we also have to discuss about that what was the reason that they failed to get the victory. Native rulers failed to get the victory. This question is a very simple question. This question is a very simple question, and while writing the answer of the question, what you have to do is you have to write about the British army, superiority of the British army, okay, and you have to discuss about the limitations of armies of the native rulers. This is a simple question. Okay, so what are the other dimensions that we have to prepare? So first, for writing the answer of this question, what we will do, we will follow the same format which we used to follow in other answers, like intro, that is the next part will be the main body and the next one will be conclusion. So this will be a simple format here that we have to follow: intro, main body and conclusion. So in the introduction portion, what we are going to write, okay, in the introduction portion we can write about the role of Indian soldiers. Okay, the Indian soldiers played a very important role in the establishment and expansion of British Empire in India. Okay, this you can write in your introduction, and after that what you have to write here is that in main body you will discuss two main aspects here. In main body, what you are going to discuss? You are going to discuss two main aspects. And what are these aspects? The first aspect that you have to discuss is that the British Indian Army, composition of British Indian Army, and the role of British Indian Army that was played in the establishment and expansion of British Empire. And while writing the answers, you will discuss about the positive aspects of British Indian Army. And for that, what are the points that you can write in your answer? So these are the very general points, and I hope that each and every student who is preparing for the civil services is familiar of these points. For example, when we talk about British Indian Army, when we talk about British, okay, we have to learn this thing that British has good military experiences, they have good military and diplomatic experiences. The British had good military and diplomatic experiences. Okay, they are fighting important wars in their global military campaigns, so that is why they have a very good military strategy. They have a very good military strategy. They have a very good military discipline. Okay, So if you are good in military strategy, if you are good in your military diplomacy, definitely this will provide a military superiority, okay, over your counterparts. So this was the main dimension, military superiority of the British, their superior military skills, we cannot deny this thing that British were having superior military skills, okay. So when British came to India, East India Company came to India, okay, this was only for doing trade, but later on when they started assuming the role of the rulers, they got this role after 1765. They have to maintain their administrative control here, okay, and they have to expand their empire. And for that, Indians played a very important role, okay. We can say that Indians themselves played a very important role in the subjugation of India. British won India with the support of Indians themselves. And here we are also talking about army. There were military recruitments and the people joined British Indian Army. Why the people were joining British Indian Army at this point of time? We can say that the people were joining British Indian Army because the British Indian Army was giving them regular salaries. The British Indian Army was giving them regular salaries. So this regular salaries is a very important point, okay, regular payment. This will create a sense of belonging to the people. So this regular payment will create a sense of belonging with the British, okay, because these soldiers were getting first time regular payment, okay. Earlier in native rulers, okay, they were not getting regular payments. So this is one of the reason. And when the people, Indian people were joining British Army, what they were getting was professional military training, okay. So first time what Indian soldiers were getting, they were getting professional military training. They were getting professional military training. First time they are getting regular salary. First time they are getting professional military training. Definitely this will give them a completely new experience, okay. And this experience is good. They are learning the use of firearms, okay. They are learning the use of cannons. So this is a good experience for the Indian soldiers and they are happily enlisted for the British Army due to these factors, okay. And what these Indian soldiers were doing, these Indian soldiers under the leadership of their British commanders, East India Company, what they were doing, they were fighting and winning important battles, and that too consistently, continuously. They were winning important battles. So if you are winning important battles, that will also give you a sense of, you can say that, motivation. For example, what British did in the establishment of British rule, in that process the British had to fight with their other commercial rivals. For example, British had to fight with Portuguese, British had to fight with Dutch, okay, and French were the main enemy. And what British did, British just defeated their commercial rivals one by one, okay. In this way they just tackled their commercial rivalries. So what Indian soldiers, which were important part of British East India Company, were doing, they were getting victory in Anglo-French rivalry also. They were getting victory over other Europeans also. So this will give them a kind of motivation. And what will happen later on? In the process of expansion of British Empire, British has to fight with many native rulers. You must have heard about Mysore, you must have heard about Maratha, you must have heard about Bengal, you must have heard about Awadh. So these native rulers, what British are doing? British are winning the battles one by one, okay. So at this point of time, what we see, that British are getting victory at a very comparative ease. They are getting victory very easily, okay. And these victories are ensured by the support of Indian soldiers, okay. And one of the most important point that you have to understand here is that what was the procedure for the recruitment of Indian soldiers in British Indian Army, what were the procedure for the recruitment of Indian soldiers? So you have to just understand this thing, that while recruiting Indian soldiers, what British were doing, they were not giving any importance or attention to the caste and creed affiliations of the people. Which caste do you belong? It does not matter for the British. They will give equal opportunity to Indian soldiers, whether they are Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, whatever. Okay. So this is also a very important point, because what we see here, skill, military skills are more important. Your personal skills are more important, okay, over your caste and creed identities, caste and creed. So this is one of the most important point, that the procedure of selection, okay, was based on the skills of the people. So the Indian soldiers were welcoming this thing. But all these developments we are talking about the initial phase. So this I will clear once I will complete discussion of this question. Now what will happen later on? The British Indian Army was fortunate to get the services of some of the superior military commanders, and they have very successfully designed their line of command, first line of command and second line of command. This structure was very good in British Indian Army, okay, and British were fortunate to get the military services of Robert Clive, Warren Hastings, Hector Munro. You must have heard the name. And their second line leadership was also very much superior. And one of the most important point here is that British Indian Army, okay, was having a good military command structure. And in this military command structure, we all know that there were three presidencies: Bengal, Madras and Bombay, okay. So British could get their military backup from any of these presidencies where they are facing any difficulty, or otherwise they can also get the military or financial support from their mother nation, okay. So this just created a very good position for the British Indian Army in India, okay. And in the initial phase, the British are treating Indian soldiers very differently, that I will discuss later on, okay. So this is one part of your answer. In the main body you can write that British Indian Army, which was mostly comprising of Indian soldiers, was winning consistent battles because of these, okay, positive characteristics, these be important features. This we can write, but we also have to write about the limitations of armies of local rulers or the native rulers. So in the main body, what we can do, we can write another part here. This is part A, and in our part B, we can write about the limitations in the armies of local rulers. So what are the limitations? Both these parts are essential to write in your answer. What are the limitations under the army of native rulers? So we can say that in 18th century, when British were establishing and expanding their empire in India, there was political faction among the native rulers. There was lack of unity among the native rulers. So this lack of unity among the local rulers, okay, due to this lack of unity, the local rulers will never develop an integrated military command structure, okay. So this is one of the major shortcomings or the limitations. Definitely this will discourage the soldiers who are working in these armies also. The second important point is that when we talk about the military skills and diplomatic skills, and when we compare it to the British East India Company Army, we find this thing that the British were more superior in their military and diplomatic skills. Yet there are some exceptions in the armies of native rulers, or some of the native rulers were very good in their diplomatic skills, military skills. For example, you must have heard the name of Hyder Ali, Tipu Sultan. They were good diplomats also. You must have heard the name of Ranjit Singh. He was also known for his diplomatic skills. So these are some exceptions. But when we talk about the majority of the rulers, we find that they lacked such kind of military and diplomatic skills, okay. And the native rulers, their armies, the rulers, they did not develop first line and second line kind of command, okay, in their army. So this is also one of the important reason that the first line and second line command, this was not well developed in the armies of native rulers. For example, when we will discuss about Anglo-Maratha War, okay, then I will discuss with you that how in Anglo-Maratha wars, after Anglo-Maratha wars, and Marathas fought a very famous battle, okay, with Ahmad Shah Abdali. So what happened in that battle? The first line command structure was completely destroyed, and the Marathas had not developed their second line command structure. So this will also have a impact. So here this is also a limitation for the armies of native rulers, okay. And finally, the most important point is that what was the procedure for the selection of soldiers in the armies of native rulers or the local rulers. So in this procedure, what we see is that your caste, okay, your religious identity, your relation with the ruling class, that was the most important criteria for your selection in the army, okay. So what we see, a kind of nepotism was practiced. It means that skills was not given priority. So definitely this will have a negative impact now, okay. So this we can also write. The procedure of selection, the procedure of recruitment, selection, this was also, this cannot be justified. This was not good in, as we compare it to the British Indian Army, okay. Yet there were discriminations in British Indian Army that I am going to discuss later on, but we are talking about the initial phase of development, okay. And when we talk about the military strategy, definitely the British were having a competitive edge in the military strategy, okay. There are some exceptions, some Indian rulers were good military strategists also, but this is an exception. And finally, what we can say, the idea of nationhood. India was still a nation in making, and those Indian soldiers who are working in this British Indian Army, okay, they don't have this sense of understanding that we belong to the same nation. There were hundreds of native states, regional states, okay, and they were treating themselves as a separate unit, okay. So these are some of the reasons that what we see, that the Indian soldiers who are working in the armies of British India Company, due to this lack of feeling of nationhood, okay, what will happen? They will not unite, okay. They will not understand. In the initial phase, they are unable to understand the true nature and spirit of British rule in India, okay, and that is why they are helping and supporting the British, okay. So this was the reason that you have to discuss in your answer. And finally, you can write a very short conclusion, or you can skip the conclusion also, okay. So this is the very format of the question which we are discussing. Now I am going to discuss with you the main theme about the same question. So whenever you are practicing answer writing, now always try to follow this strategy. For example, the main theme is related to the role of Indian soldiers, the role of Indian soldiers. So this we have to study as a holistic thing. In detail, we will discuss this theme in our classes, but I am giving you a short glimpse so that if you are doing self-study, okay, you can follow this pattern. The role of Indian soldiers. So the role of Indian soldiers were in the initial phase of British rule. The role of Indian soldiers in the initial phase of British rule. This we have to understand, initial phase of British rule, okay. When we talk about the initial phase of British rule, we are talking about the establishment and expansion of British rule in India. So this role is important, okay, establishment and expansion of British rule in India. So military support that was provided by the Indians. So when we talk about the military support, when we talk about the Indian soldiers' contribution, okay, we must understand about the military campaigns against native rulers, the military campaigns against native rulers, okay, in which the British got the support of Indians. Can you name some of the military campaign of the native rulers? All of you have studied about this, the military campaign against the native rulers. For example, okay, remember Mysore, Anglo-Mysore War. This was a military campaign against the local rulers. Just recall Anglo-Maratha wars. Just you can think about the Anglo-Maratha wars. This is also a military campaign against the local rulers. Just think about the Anglo-Sikh wars. This is also the military campaign against the local rulers, and there were various military campaigns also, okay. The military campaigns against the neighboring states of India, against the neighboring states of India. In class 12th NCERT, you are going to read the same topic, that what kind of relations were maintained by British with Nepal, with Afghanistan. These are neighboring states now, Nepal, Afghanistan, Burma. Okay, so what was the role of Indian soldiers in these neighboring countries like Nepal, Afghanistan and Burma? The British also got the service of Indian soldiers in their global military campaigns, means the campaign outside India. They also got the support of Indian soldiers. Okay, so the campaign, global military campaigns, the British got the support of Indians. Okay, like, and in First World War, Second World War, the British got the support of Indian soldiers. So Indian soldiers played a very important role. Okay, Indian soldiers played a very important role in the establishment and expansion of British rule in India. That is why we say that British conquered India with the support of Indians themselves. Okay, this is a famous saying, and you must remember this, that British conquered India with the support of Indians themselves. Okay, so in this way, British Empire was established in India. Okay, and Indian soldiers now were ready to adapt to the skills that were provided by the British, and British East India Company was also very quick to combine Western military strategy with these Indian military traditions. This is a very good point. Western military strategy, this is also very smart skill, combining Western military strategy with Indian martial traditions. So what we see, that this is a very new kind of thing where Indian soldiers are getting victories and they are being respected in the society. And why Indian soldiers are supporting British East India Company in their military campaigns? Because India was still a nation in making. People were not understanding the meaning of nationalism. Soldiers are not aware about the true or the real nature of the British Empire. Okay, they are not aware about the real nature of the British Empire. So this is one part that you have to understand, that in the initial phase, in formative stage, how Indian soldiers played a very important role. Okay, and the question that I have discussed with you, that has been asked in 2022 GS paper 1, is related to this part only. Okay, so this is one of the part that we have to understand. As the time progresses, what we see, as the time progresses, we see that Indians will realize what British have established in India. They have established their roots in India. They are gaining maximum profits from India. Okay, and this profit is being diverted to Britain. And now British started projecting their agenda of racial superiority in India. Okay, so after some time, we will realize that we are being exploited. Indian soldiers will realize that they are being exploited. So when Indian soldiers will realize this thing, what will they do? When Indian soldiers will realize this thing, what will they do? Definitely, they are going to oppose such kind of exploitation. And what we see, the first great revolt in India, that is revolt of 1857. The another name for this revolt of 1857 is Sepoy Mutiny. The another name for this revolt of 1857 is Sepoy Mutiny. And when we are talking about Sepoy, we are talking about Indian soldiers. So this mutiny, this is also known as First War of Independence, started as a result of the dissatisfaction of Indian soldiers. So why Indian soldiers are being dissatisfied? Because now they are aware of the real character of the East India Company. So this great revolt happens in 1857, that unknowingly the Indian soldiers were contributing in creating a great imperial design for the British, and this Indian soldiers were doing unknowingly. When will they will realize this thing? The revolt of 1857 will happen. And this revolt also shows that the people united, not only soldiers but the other section of the people also united. So this revolt also shows that now the people's now the Indians are against the company rule. So what will happen after this revolt of 1857? some major changes were introduced in the year 1858, and the act is Act of 1858. Some of the major changes were introduced, okay, in army and elsewhere also these major changes were introduced. East India Company rule was ended, and in army, since this revolt started with the support discontent, so what will happen, important changes will be introduced in Indian army. And why these changes will be introduced? These changes will be introduced so that to prevent the next occurrence of the same kind of revolt. So these changes will be introduced in 1858. So this again is a very important part for your mains question, and the content that I am discussing with you, you can just revise it in your NCERT class 12 book, Bipin Chandra book. So this is also an important part from where the question may be asked. What are the important changes? What are the important changes that were introduced in British Indian Army after 1857 revolt by the Act of 1858? So what are the important changes? The first important change was in 1858, the British Indian Army was reorganized very carefully, okay, and this was reorganized because the main intention was to prevent the occurrence of same kind of revolt again. And we all know that when we talk about the composition of army, the ratio between Indian and European soldiers, okay, was designed in such a way in earlier phase that Indian soldiers were dominating. Now what will happen, the ratio, okay, the proportion of Europeans to Indians, this will be changed. Definitely still Indians are more in numbers, but the ratio will be changed. It means that the number of European soldiers will be increased, okay, and these numbers will be increased more in those regions which were the storm centers of the revolt of 1857, okay. So the proportion will be changed, the proportion, the ratio between the Indian soldiers and the European soldiers will be changed, okay. Now what you have to understand is that in military there are some superior military positions. For example, okay, if you are operating a tank, it means that you are a superior military position. If you are in the position of operating a tank, you can cause more destruction. So what will happen? Such key positions now will be given to Europeans, okay, after 1857, because now British are very careful. They want to protect the vast empire that they have created in India. So all important or key positions in Indian army was given to the Europeans themselves, whether we are talking about artillery, whether we are talking about the tanks, all these important positions were given to Europeans. And this was a convention that was followed by the British, that no Indian can rise above the post of Subedar in Indian army. This is the part of the same agenda, okay, that to keep you out from the key positions. It means that Indians were excluded from the officer corps. So in this way, what we see, the discrimination between Indian soldiers and European soldiers. And what British did, they always used their policy of divide and rule, okay, the policy of balance and counterpoise wherever they are ruling. In every sphere they use this policy of divide and rule. Definitely they are going to use this divide and rule policy in Indian army also, okay. So British use their policy of divide and rule in Indian army also. How they use this policy of divide and rule? For using this policy, what they did, okay, they started discrimination on the basis of caste, creed, religion. This started being promoted, okay. Earlier while discussing the answer of the question, what we said, in initial phase the recruitment in the British Indian army was, okay, different from the recruitment in the armies of the native rulers. What the British are doing now, they are changing the method of recruitment, and they are now giving importance to caste, creed and religion identities. Why? To just discourage the sense of unity among the Indian soldiers, okay. And British also created different groups, among Indian soldiers. For example, you must have heard the name of these groups: martial groups and non-martial groups. Okay, martial and non-martial. Okay, martial if you are in British Indian Army soldier, and if you are in martial group, that is a matter of pride for you, na? So who were put in martial group? Those Indian soldiers were put in martial group who supported British in the suppression of revolt of 1857. So very carefully British designed this structure of martial and non-martial classes. All those reasons, the soldiers from those regions who have participated in the revolt of 1857, they were treated as non-martial classes. Okay, so in this way the kind of discrimination was promoted. And what British will do in order to divide the Indian armed personnel in British Indian Army, in order to divide the Indian people, what they will do, they will try to promote certain kind of loyalties. And what are these loyalties? The loyalties which I am talking about, these are the communal loyalties. They will try to promote communal loyalties. They will try to promote caste based loyalties. The British will try to promote tribal loyalties. The British will try to promote regional loyalties. So these were promoted and encouraged among Indian soldiers. Why? Because they wanted to curb the growth of nationalism among Indian soldiers. Okay, so these were promoted. Caste and communal military regiments and companies were established. So what we see, that British made every attempt to stop Indian soldiers or to promote, they made every attempt to curb the growth of nationalism among the Indian soldiers. You can just imagine the thing that Indian soldiers were also prevented, okay, from getting the newspapers, journalists or journals, newspapers and journals. Why? Because if Indian soldiers will be aware of what the economic critics and the other critics are criticizing the colonial empire, so definitely this will going to create some sort of problems for the British. So the British are trying, okay, to stop these things from Indian soldiers. So in the formative stage, Indian soldiers supported in the British efforts, but when later on they realized the nature of the colonial rule, what they did, they started showing their dissatisfaction against the colonial empire. So this is what you see, 1857 revolt and the changes after 1858. As the national movement progresses after 1885, as the national movement progresses, there was growth of nationalism. It means that the sense of oneness was being promoted, the growth of nationalist feelings among the people. So what will happen? These nationalist feelings or sentiments will be promoted among Indian soldiers also, okay. So the national movement is progressing, okay. What we see during First World War, 1914 to 1918, Gandhiji appealed to support the British in the First World War effort, and Indian soldiers supported British Indian Army in their First World War effort. The role of Indian soldiers is important here also. In Second World War also, between 1939 to 1945, the support of Indian soldiers is very much important for the British. Why Indian soldiers supported in First World War and Second World War? Because the Indian soldiers were also expecting this thing, that if we are supporting British in World War efforts, in return British are going to introduce some changes, okay, or they were expecting their country will be free from the British rule or the colonial rule. So they supported, okay, as a part of our nationalist program or the national movement that was in progress at that time, okay. When British Empire was in declining phase, okay, definitely like other empires, what we see, there was a formative stage of British Empire, okay, there was an imperial stage of British Empire, and finally there is a declining phase of British Empire also. And this declining phase starts from this Second World War after 1939 onwards. So in this declining phase also, what we see, the role of Indian soldiers was very much important in the freedom of India. Okay, when we will discuss in our classes, we will discuss the role of Indian National Army, INA, role of INA. Again, what we are seeing, we are looking at the role of Indian soldiers. Okay, we will also discuss the role of RIN mutiny, Royal Indian Navy mutiny. This is also, okay, a part of the contribution of the Indian soldiers, okay, in the freedom of India. You will also discuss about INA trials. So this is also important. So you will also get the questions from this part. Okay, questions have been asked in previous years about the role of INA, RIN mutiny, what the role was played, okay, by these mutiny and the armed conflict by the INA. So this is a part of the complete, you can say that, theme that has been asked in this paper. So while you are doing self study, what you have to do is that you will select references from different chapters that are related to the role of Indian soldiers and try to understand it completely. Okay, if you will try to read it in a very fragmented manner, you will not be able to write good answer in your main examination, because what is needed is while writing your answers, you must be familiar with the entire developments. You have to follow an integrated approach, and you can write good answers only when you are familiar with the conceptual part of modern Indian history. Okay, I hope you have understood that the very simple question that we have discussed today. I have also discussed with you a glimpse of the entire development, and we are going to discuss all these events in details in our classes. Thanks.